It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Al, I was kind of struck by this irony of former President Biden announcing the impact of his anti-inflation bill at the same time that the Fed reported record inflation. And some people have been commenting that the only thing that saved the day was Lindsey Graham coming on almost in the same time, announcing a nationwide ban on abortion. And it was just too rich for me not to bring this stuff up for you all to take a look at and give us your thoughts.
Well, the timing was probably a little bit unfortunate for President Biden, but what he is learning is that inflation is really stubborn. It's hard to wring it out, even when things seem to be going a little bit better, and it affects everybody. So the thing he does have going for him is that gas prices have been going down over the last 2.5 months. And I saw a presentation by my old friend Steve Ratner on Morning Joe yesterday, where he sort of traced how people view inflation as being very consistent with the direction of gas prices. So that's a good thing for President Biden. What Lindsey Graham, I don't understand him. I mean, abortion is a very difficult issue. It's complicated, particularly complicated for Republicans. Voters are against, reacted negatively to the overturning of Roe versus Wade. It's become a big Democratic issue, increased Democratic intensity, and why Lindsey Graham would decide he wanted to, who's not running this year, incidentally, would decide he wanted to raise the abortion issue. It makes no sense to me, but to be honest with you, since John McCain died, nothing Lindsey Graham has done has made any sense to me.
Let me bring in Craig on this, because I think it is kind of interesting to kind of trade thoughts on what was behind this strategy. But I was under the understanding, Craig, that this was actually to help the Republican Party kind of survive the afterburn of the Supreme Court decision on abortion. Do you agree with that?
No, look, I think when I saw Lindsey Graham go out, I thought of Rudy Giuliani, another public figure who, if he's not in the news long enough, goes out and says outrageous things and gets himself back in the news. I mean, the amazing thing to me is that Lindsey Graham has been around a long while and did something totally uncoordinated with his own party, and put everybody in his party in the position of, first of all, wondering what he was doing, why he was doing it then. They had a whole message on the inflation, as you pointed out. But now they have to take sides. So Marco Rubio, who's running, who has tried to be out on this abortion issue with a similar national statement, he has to embrace Lindsey Graham. Former Vice President Pence has now endorsed Lindsey Graham. You know, they must be beside themselves. And so, no, it put Republicans right back into this debate. It drives voter interest among those who are pro-choice. It drives voter interest sky high, and it leaves Republicans looking, in some cases, like they're out of touch with a large percentage of the voting population. I respect the fact that many people agree with Lindsey Graham, but it's not the majority of voters. And so why he chose to do this when he did, as I said, I think it's the same virus that seems to affect Giuliani, and that is get out in the news as often as you can. And if you wonder whether I'm right about that, when you listen to Lindsey Graham's press conference, he must have said 6 times, "I'm not going to sit on the sidelines," which is obviously where he thought he was until his news conference.
Yeah.
You know, the thing that's most interesting about both of these situations you raised is that we said all fall or all summer and now into the fall that the midterms really are going to be a matter of how the outcome's going to really depend on how voters decide to define them. Are they going to define them as they normally would a midterm, as a referendum on the incumbent, with inflation and crime and immigration being the central issues? If they do, the Republicans are going to do very well. Or are they going to define it on sort of freedom and choice and saving democracy and Donald Trump? And in the summer, it's moved more toward the latter than the former. And that's why the Democrats have improved their poll numbers in the House, and why 538 suggests that they have a 71, I think, % chance of winning the Senate. I think that's probably a little high. But one of the most interesting things I saw is that Nate Cohn of the New York Times did two things this week that were really fascinating. So I guess there are two things I saw. One was that he showed that there are more Google hits on Trump than there are on Biden this year, which means he says that's sort of an indication that voters are probably as likely to have a referendum on Trump as they are on Biden. That helps the Democrats. The other thing he said, which I thought was really interesting, he took the polling numbers in 2018 and 2020 and compared the actual results to what the pre-election polls showed in a bunch of Senate races. And then he applied the difference to the 2022 polls. And it really makes the Senate a complete toss-up, because Democrats are running ahead in states where they, in 2018 and 2020, polled better than they ran.
So Craig, back to the Biden inflation strategy. It's probably unlikely that that things will get particularly better in the next couple of months. And even though this has been kind of a bad day for the GOP in terms of messaging, don't you feel like that's still something that's going to hang over the November elections?
I think inflation will hang over the elections, but it's going to be different for different people. And I remember, Al probably does as well, Gerald Ford faced this high inflation, gave a speech where the theme was whip inflation now. Some clever staff person produced a button, WIN, for whip inflation now. And it looked great for about an hour until someone turned the button upside down. And then it was NIM, no immediate miracles. And the fact is, it was true then, it's true now. These economic numbers are pretty much baked in. There's not a lot that's going to change them. What I do think is worth thinking about, though, is people are affected in different ways by inflation. Al mentioned fuel prices down over 20% since, I think, June. That is very big. That's a number of people feel every time they go to the pump, and that's come down, and that's important for them. Food prices, they're down or just slightly up. They're not anywhere near the 8+% of the overall inflation rate. Mortgages are up, 5.8%, I think. But if you're not buying a house, that doesn't affect you. So this affects people differently. But real things like fuel prices, had we had a rail strike, that would have an impact. And so while some people are going to be concerned about it, the consumer, and I think that these are the numbers coming out that came out today on Thursday, retail spending is up slightly, very small, but up slightly. So even during this period of high inflation, you've got the consumer a little more positive about purchasing. And that's where I think those are the numbers I'll watch. Yeah. Consumer confidence, yes, it's down, but it was way down because of COVID. It's worked its way back up, and directionally, some of these numbers are improving. And that goes right back to what Al said. That to me says a Senate that's absolutely a toss-up in this midterm election, because consumers, which we do represent sort of 70% of our economy, their spending, that's the group to watch. And if they're feeling a little better, even if it's still down from where it's been in the past, they're not going to go punish the people in power, in my view.
Hey, we got to wrap this up, fellows, but I want to leave with your impressions. It seems like Donald Trump had a pretty good Tuesday evening when you look at, for example, New Hampshire. How do you, Al, kind of factor that in as your overall strategy or thoughts about the election?
Clearly, Trump has had a pretty good primary season, and that's probably been bad for the Republicans because he is the candidates who have won Republican primaries in a number of Senate seats, and New Hampshire is an excellent example, who are very pro-Trump, are much less likely to win a general election than another candidate. In New Hampshire, for example, Governor Sununu would probably have wiped Maggie Hassan, but he chose not to run in large part because of Trump. And then Trump's acolyte wins the nomination. And even though there hadn't been a lot of polling there, the Cook report just moved that to lean Democratic. Look, just to try to sum up our discussion of today, the Democratic strategy is to not talk about inflation. It's to change the subject. And, President Biden did his major speech on, the dangers to democracy but then he, with this event, we wanted to have a bill signing, I guess, reverted back to inflation, but that's off message. I think the key thing, and this relates to the primaries, is over the fall, there's going to be a lot more stuff about Trump. And the January 6th committee is now scheduled a hearing for September 28th. They'll probably have more hearings in October. They've got to hurry because they're going to lose their mandate if the Republicans win control of the House. And that could make this election a lot more complicated because, as I said a minute ago, it's either going to be a referendum on Biden or a referendum on Trump, and those would produce very different results.
Frank, you have the last word.
Well, my answer to your question is a short one, and that is Trump may have thought he had a good night. Republicans had a very bad night in New Hampshire. They did waste a lot of money trying to elect a candidate in the primary that could be elected in the general election. It looks like they got a candidate who will likely not be elected in the general election. If the Senate goes or remains in Democratic hands, I think that you have to lay the blame on Donald Trump. His behavior, forget his behavior in office, which was bad enough, his behavior since he's left office, and his the endorsement of candidates who are going to have a difficult time winning in the general election are going to cost Republicans, probably the Senate at this point.
We have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much indeed. Have a great weekend.